Drag, an acronym said to stand for the phrase dressed resembling a girl. The practice of drag is many centuries old. During the time of William Shakespeare, the theater had close connections to the church, which meant women were not free to appear on stage in productions the way their male counterparts were. Any female characters in a play had to be portrayed by men dressed as women. Nowadays, the term drag has a broader meaning than this, as there are both drag queens and drag kings. The art of drag has become more mainstream than ever before due to the popularity of the Drag Race franchise and its many iterations across the globe. This practice of men dressing up as women for entertainment purposes has existed in Hollywood since the very beginning of its inception. But for this video, we're going to examine two prominent films that feature men dressing as women and the parallels between them. The first is Billy Wilder's Some Like It Hot, and the other is the Wayans brothers' White Chicks. In the 1920s, Hollywood had a number of scandals that created a retaliatory moral outrage against the industry. From the unsolved murder of director and actor William Desmond Taylor, and the salacious coverage of his personal life, the details of which were exposed by the media following his death, the acquittal of silent film comic Fatty Arbuckle in the death of actress Virginia Rapp, whom he was also alleged to have assaulted, the mysterious circumstances of Thomas H. Ince's death, and a number of drug and alcohol-related deaths of other Hollywood stars. All of these things led conservative religious and political groups to push for morality codes and clauses to be implemented to censor the art and police the talent of Hollywood. These guidelines began to appear in contracts, so if the talent didn't abide by these morality clauses, there would be grounds to terminate them. All of this moral policing culminated in the creation of the Hays Code, more formally referred to as the Motion Picture Production Code. The key figureheads of Hollywood only agreed to abide by the code to try to avoid an even more aggressive intervention by the government against the industry. Adopting this code was a placating measure under which artists would self-censor when making movies. For context, pre-Code Hollywood had produced a number of films that ruffled the feathers of these conservative organizations, so the many aforementioned scandals of the 1920s acted as fuel for an already lit fire. Pre-Code Hollywood films had featured a number of things conservative organizations objected to, like profanity, promiscuity, prostitution, interracial relationships, relations between people of the same gender, violence, and so on and so forth. The enforcement of the Hays Code gradually became more strict after it was first passed. Eventually, the failure to follow its many rules could lead to a film not being permitted to play in American cinemas. The Hays Code had far too many rules for me to attempt to share a neat summary of them, so let's just jump ahead to how its hold on the industry began to lessen over time. After an extended period of Hays Code conservatism keeping art in a stranglehold, the film industry began to face new competition. After World War II, there was the blossoming television industry, and films imported from overseas contained more provocative content than what was permitted by the Hays Code. The social climate and attitudes were also shifting towards favoring more freedom in artistic expression. In 1955, The Man with the Golden Arm was released into cinemas without the approval of the Hays Code. The film starred Frank Sinatra, who portrayed a drug addict. This subject matter went against one of the many rules of the Hays Code. By the time The Man with the Golden Arm was released, Frank Sinatra was already a well-established celebrity both as an actor and a singer. The film got great reviews and was released in enough cinemas to turn a profit. It was also nominated for 3 Academy Awards, including one for Sinatra in the category of Best Actor in a Leading Role. For a film to be critically and commercially successful and be a contender during award show season, all without the approval of the Hays Code, it was evident that the tides were turning. By 1959, many of the rules of the Hays Code were being given more room to be bent or broken, but the one thing that was still more strictly regulated were the depictions of homosexuality and similarly oriented subject matter. 1959 was the year that Billy Wilder's Some Like It Hot was released without the approval of the Hays Code, as it was a film that contained men cross-dressing as women and flirted with the idea of homosexuality without outright condemning it. I will discuss more specifics of the film's material later in this video. Some Like It Hot was critically acclaimed and would quickly come to be regarded by many as one of the greatest films of all time. 1 year after its release, the head of the MPA proposed the idea that the code should be switched to a categorized rating system. The masses and the industry itself were clearly ignoring the antiquated censorship system anyway. In 1968, the first iteration of the rating system we have today was officially put into action, though it would undergo its own series of changes over the decades that followed, thus marked the demise of the Hays Code. Many film historians have cited the success of Some Like It Hot as an integral part of this change in the film industry. In contemporary social media discourse, particularly in fan circles, people like to pay compliments to things by referring to them as a cultural reset. But when it comes to Some Like It Hot, this label could not be more fitting. Louis B. Mayer, famed film producer and co-founder of MGM Studios, has, to put it mildly, a complicated legacy. It could very well be the topic of its own video essay, but the one detail being highlighted for this video discussion is the fact that he founded the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and the Academy Awards show in an attempt to bolster good public relations and fend off the formation of desperately needed unions for workers in the industry. Louis B. Mayer has been dead since 1957, but his PR stunt is still around to serve as a barometer of the general climate of the film industry. The Oscars So White hashtag was created in 2015 by April Rain to protest against the exclusionary practices of the Academy when all 20 of the acting nominations were given to white performers for the second year in a row, which demonstrated an egregious lack of progress after roughly a century of Hollywood's aversion to diversity and inclusivity. Even now, the battle wages for artists from marginalized groups to be given even a fraction of the recognition that their privileged counterparts are showered with. Chris Rock was hired to host the 2005 Oscars. During the show, one of the segments consisted of Chris Rock going out into a cinema to interview random moviegoers and ask them whether or not they had seen the films that had been nominated for Oscars that year.
Did you see $1 Million Baby?
Didn't see that. No, I didn't.
At best, the results demonstrated that there is a culture clash between the moviegoing masses and fancy Hollywood awards shows that were created to stop the formation of unions. And at worst, they further demonstrated the exclusionary status quo of the industry at large. Films like Sideways, The Aviator, and Finding Neverland might have been the darlings of the Oscars that year, but the moviegoers in the segment expressed preferences for films like Alien vs. Predator, Saw, and The Chronicles of Riddick. Genres like science fiction, horror, and action are rarely given the same consideration for accolades during award show season the way genres like historical dramas, kitchen sink dramas, white savior stories, and biopics are. During this segment of Chris Rock conducting interviews at the cinema, there was another film that members of the public expressed an appreciation for: White Chicks.
Did you see White Chicks?
Oh yeah, I love White Chicks. Yeah.
Nah, yo, hold my poodle. Hold my poodle.
Did you see White Chicks?
Yes, I love that movie.
Brittany and Tiffany Wilson.
Did you see White Chicks?
Yeah, I seen that.
Okay.
That was good.
Your mother's so old that her breast milk is powdered. You breastfeed like this.
White Chicks has been labeled by some as a cult classic. The definition of the term cult classic can vary. Sometimes it refers to a film that performed poorly at the box office only to gain a larger audience later on, perhaps through syndication and home video sale. Other times it is applied to films that are too camp to be appreciated by a predominantly straight-laced pool of quote-unquote professional critics, and other times the term can refer to films that are not marketed properly when they are first released, and thus take longer than the initial theatrical release to find the audience that the art will resonate with. In the case of White Chicks, it's peculiar to observe the cult classic label be placed upon it. It was a financial success at the box office, gained plenty of fans right from the start, including me, and the only conclusion I can come to is that the difference in reaction to Some Like It Hot and White Chicks is heavily influenced by an inability or an unwillingness for the extremely non-diverse pool of mainstream critics to appreciate stories from people of different backgrounds to them. White Chicks not only made money, it was embraced by more than just a black audience. When asked about the appeal of White Chicks, Marlon Wayans had this to say: "You know who loves White Chicks the most? White Chicks. That's how you know it's a good movie. For us, I think a good joke in comedy is when the people you make fun of laugh the loudest. And what's beautiful is that we're equal opportunity offenders. It was a great exploration of gender, of race, of pop culture, and done with kid gloves so everybody could laugh. And I think that's what makes it a cult classic to this day." Before getting into the specifics of the plot of these films, it's important to have an introduction to the creatives behind each of them. First, we have Billy Wilder, the director, producer, and co-writer of Some Like It Hot. Wilder was born to a family of Polish Jews in a town that at the time was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which is why he would eventually be described as Austrian American. He had the gift of gab, which helped to jumpstart his career as a journalist in Berlin. While navigating that career, he also began to work as a screenwriter. He eventually fled Europe to go to America because of the rise of a certain fascist political party. He continued his work as a screenwriter and eventually became a prolific, multifaceted creative in Hollywood. As a director, Wilder heavily focused on his scripts. His writing took precedence over flashy cinematography, and this can be seen in Some Like It Hot through the often long, uninterrupted takes that keep the focus on the witty dialogue and the performances. In many ways, it's like watching live theater, because there isn't much fancy camera work or elaborate editing to zhuzh up the final product. Billy Wilder also had great instincts about how to direct his actors. When Marilyn Monroe was filming Some Like It Hot, she was grappling with a number of personal and emotional issues. Her marriage to Arthur Miller was experiencing problems, and she was also dealing with substance abuse. She was pregnant while filming and was stressed about whether or not she was showing, and also about the possibility of miscarrying, since she had already experienced unsuccessful pregnancies before. While filming, she would struggle to remember her lines, which led to a number of retakes for her and her scene partners. Tony Curtis was particularly vexed by this.
Where's that bourbon?
There have been reports that it took over 40 takes for her to successfully deliver this line. Still, through all of Marilyn's stage fright and friction with the cast and crew, Billy Wilder managed to direct her into giving a sweet, earnest performance that everyone loves and appreciates after all this time. Another point about Billy Wilder that offers a deeper insight into his character was his stance on the unethical actions of the HUAC, which stands for the House Committee on Un-American Activities. Though the organization was said to have been created to investigate activities associated with fascism or communism, the historical legacy of HUAC is largely associated with McCarthyism and the zealous hounding of US residents to search for communists. The HUAC is largely known to film history fans for its many waves of blacklisting artists in Hollywood that were accused of being communists. The Hollywood 10 is the colloquial term for 10 celebrities that were blacklisted in 1947 after being subpoenaed by Congress and refusing to answer questions about whether or not they were involved with the Communist Party. In response to this, several Hollywood celebrities formed and joined a group called the Committee for the First Amendment. Members of the group included iconic artists like Judy Garland, Lucille Ball, Lena Horne, Burt Lancaster, Gene Kelly, Groucho Marx, and Frank Sinatra. Many of these celebrities weren't actually members of the Communist Party, but were simply opposed to this intrusive action of the government against the freedom of speech and expression of artists. From the Hays Code to the HUAC to the rampant imperialist groups that have pumped money into the industry for decades to fund their propaganda, it's a wonder any artists in Hollywood manage to still create meaningful art. Billy Wilder was one of the celebrities to co-create the Committee for the First Amendment, which eventually fell apart when one of the members, Sterling Hayden, was discovered to have briefly been a member of the Communist Party because it had been involved with trying to help unions in Hollywood. Sterling Hayden only testified and named names because the FBI threatened to do things like send him to jail and take away his custody of his children. It's also worth noting that during this same time period, Ronald Reagan was the president of the Screen Actors Guild and a willing FBI informant, as if we needed another reminder that he's the worst. After the Committee of the First Amendment fell apart, anti-communists in the industry suggested for people to swear oaths of allegiance. During a meeting of the Screen Directors Guild, conservative director Leo McCarey proposed a vote in favor of these oaths by a show of hands. The only two who opposed the idea were Billy Wilder and John Huston, who had this to say about the incident. I am sure it was one of the bravest things that Billy, as a naturalized German, had ever done. There were 150 to 200 directors at this meeting, and here Billy and I sat alone with our hands raised in protest against the loyalty oath. John Huston would eventually move to Ireland because of his disdain for the witch hunt of the HUAC and the Red Scare in general. As for Billy Wilder, the entire purpose of bringing all of this up is to give a deeper insight into the type of person he was and how that would come across in his art. He didn't identify as a communist, but his experiences as a Jewish immigrant fleeing the uprising of fascism in Germany contributed to his strong opposition to totalitarianism. Through Some Like It Hot, he condemned archaic ideas and values, but delivered it with a sense of humor, so many people simply enjoyed the viewing experience without noticing the interwoven lessons. Howell Stoughton Wayans and Elvira Alethea were a married couple that had 10 children, several of whom would go on to become successful in show business. The Wayans family collaborated on a number of projects together in both film and television. One of their first major hits was a comedy sketch show called In Living Color. Not only did the series catapult the Wayans family into prominence, it was also credited with launching the careers of Jim Carrey, Jamie Foxx, and David Alan Grier. Rosie Perez also worked on the show as a choreographer for the in-house dance troupe known as the Fly Girls, one of whom was Jennifer Lopez, pre-Selena, pre-pop career, and pre-Bennifer, both times. In Living Color was created by Keenen Ivory Wayans, who wanted to make a show that was similar to Saturday Night Live, but with more ethnic diversity. Sometimes the comedy was criticized for how it drew on ethnic stereotypes, which would come to be a recurring pattern of push and pull between the Wayans family and a certain section of their naysayers. I'm not here to claim that artists shouldn't incorporate ethnic stereotypes into their comedy, because that description on its own is too vague for me to universally praise or condemn. Another recurring pattern of the Wayans family career is a struggle for creative control with predominantly white higher-ups in the industry. The relationship between In Living Color creator Keenen Ivory Wayans and the Fox network on which it aired began to fray during season 3, which would be the final season on which he would appear as a performer. He was still an executive producer of the series, but things worsened to such an extent that season 4 would be the final season on which all of the remaining Wayans family cast members would appear. Keenen, Sean, and Marlon would experience similar turmoil when they were ousted by the Weinstein Company from the Scary Movie film series they had created. In an interview with Variety, Marlon Wayans said, "The Weinsteins are not the best or the kindest people to be in business with. They're very much an evil regime, I guess. They do what they want to do how they do it. And it can be rude and quite disrespectful. We couldn't come to terms on the deal. It's like, if you don't want to pay for the jokes, have somebody else do it." We read on Christmas Eve that they were going with someone else for Scary Movie 3. We probably could have sued or whatever, but part of us was like, all you can do is allow us to create something new. I could write a book on that whole thing, honestly. They definitely still owe us money. Lots of money. What they did was really bad business. On In Living Color, Sean and Marlon were never more than featured cast members compared to Keenan, Damon, and Kim, all of whom were given starring billing. Sean and Marlon are the youngest of the Wayans siblings, but over time they would come to have some of the most prominent visibility of the entire family. The first 2 installments of the Scary Movie film series were created and developed by Keenan, Sean, and Marlon, with Keenan directing, and Sean and Marlon being 2 of the main lead actors. Sean and Marlon would have their fair share of memorable moments during their time playing Ray and Shorty, but we all know who the real star of the Scary Movie franchise is.
Oh, shit, he may have some money. We already committed murder, we might as well rob his ass.
I am no fan of the Weinsteins, but if they hadn't been the types of shady businessmen that will kick artists off of a film series that they created, Keenan, Sean, and Marlon would have been too preoccupied with working on Scary Movie 3 to be able to make what has become their cinematic magnum opus, White Chicks. Although I grew up watching both Some Like It Hot and White Chicks, it wasn't until I got into my adolescence that I started to pick up on certain plot parallels between the 2 stories. In Some Like It Hot, 2 struggling musicians, Joe and Jerry, witness gangster Spats Colombo and his men gun down informant Toothpick Charlie and his gang. They go on the run disguised as women because the only job they can find that will get them out of town is an all-female band that is conveniently searching for a tenor sax and a double bass player. In White Chicks, FBI agents Kevin and Marcus Copeland are trying to get back in the good graces of their boss after botching a mission, which leads them to accept the grunt work of escorting Eris sisters Brittany and Tiffany Wilson to the Hamptons and protecting them from being the next victims of a recurring series of high-profile kidnappings. A small car accident leads to minor facial injuries that prompt the Wilson sisters to refuse to go to the Hamptons, meaning the Copeland brothers won't be able to find the kidnappers and get out of the proverbial doghouse at work. So, they decide to go undercover as the Wilson sisters to find the bad guys themselves. Both duos struggle with certain aspects of pretending to be women, from the uncomfortable clothing to unwanted attention from men. There's frolicking on the beach and some romantic subplots. One man is pursued by a suitor that doesn't understand the concept of consent, and the other decides to don a facade of being more wealthy and successful than they actually are, in the hopes of wooing a woman they're interested in. There's a violent climax with a fair bit of running, but it all works out for the most part for both men in the end. One guy gets the girl despite his previous deception, and the other is surprised to find that the aggressive suitor they've been trying to fend off doesn't care about the revelation that the woman they've been pursuing is actually a man. Now, I don't point these parallels out to claim that White Chicks is a ripoff of Some Like It Hot. The Wayans brothers have not hidden the fact that they drew inspiration from it. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly, Sean and Marlon went through the history of what inspired the story. Specifically, Sean had read an article about Paris and Nikki Hilton getting into fights and acting rowdy and raunchy. Remember, this was the early 2000s when all the it girls of Hollywood pop culture were juggernauts in the tabloids. Sean thought it would be funny for him and Marlon to dress up and play white girls. Sean and Marlon started to brainstorm, and Marlon said in that interview, "We went through it and started talking about it, and then we realized it could be done. I think Some Like It Hot just crystallized it for us. Like, yeah, we could do this." Some Like It Hot was a film released in 1959, set in 1929, while White Chicks was a film set and released in the early 2000s. Even if certain beats in the story are paralleled, there are many facets of the stories that differ from one another. The general premise of men dressing up as women in movies is not isolated to these two films. Some Like It Hot and White Chicks are commentating on completely different cultural eras, and it's done with the sense of humor of the auteurs that created them. For Billy Wilder, it's the quick-witted dialogue in long takes resembling live theater, and for the Wayans brothers, there is a heavy use of satire, pop culture references, and some blue humor also thrown into the mix. The more crude jokes that the Wayans brothers have used in their works can put some people off. Combine that with the discrimination they receive as black artists in the industry, and there is no doubt that White Chicks has long been denied the respect it deserves. Some Like It Hot is set during the Prohibition era, and is imbued with a rebellious spirit that flirts with the forbidden. Our two leads, Joe and Jerry, are first introduced as musicians in a band playing at a speakeasy run by the gangster Spats Colombo. Joe is a player, and he's also the more reckless of the two. He is often the driving force behind getting the pair into sticky situations, while Jerry is made to suffer as a result, and chides him in the way only Jack Lemmon can.
Dude, why do I listen to you? I ought to have my head examined.
I thought you weren't talking to me.
Look at the bull fiddle. He's dressed warmer than I am.
After witnessing a hit, Joe and Jerry decide to go undercover as Josephine and Geraldine, until Jerry decides last minute that he prefers a different name.
My name is Josephine. I'm Daphne.
While this section of the video is supposed to consist of me elaborating on the various bits of social commentary in these two films, I have to take a moment to emphatically praise the comedic force that is Jack Lemmon. Everyone knows that Marilyn Monroe has a borderline mystical charisma that has often overshadowed the true depth and merits of her character. And Tony Curtis nailed the roguish sleaziness of Joe. Yes, I'm not a huge fan of Joe, but I still love this film. Ultimately, though, it is Jack Lemmon who stands out the most for his exquisite performance. Those who knew his mother, Millie Lemon, said that he had resembled and mimicked her to an uncanny degree, from the hairstyle to her mannerisms that he would use for 80% of the movie when his character is in drag.
Fresh. I'll take a rain check. Oh, you know the old shell game.
When Jerry assumes the Daphne persona, he begins to experience the type of unwanted male attention that many women unfortunately have to deal with. At first, he is giddy at the prospect of being able to be in close quarters with so many women, and does things like scheme to get Sugar drunk enough for them to hook up, until all the other women in the band overwhelm him by crowding into his bunk for an impromptu party. When the girl band arrives at their destination, Jerry begins to be aggressively pursued by Osgood Fielding III, who gets handsy with him in an elevator.
Deep sea fishing.
Well, pull in your reel, Mr. Fielding. You're barking up the wrong fish.
What kind of a girl do you think I am, Mr. Fielding? Dirty old man.
What happened?
I just got pinched in the elevator.
Well, now you know how the other half lives.
Look at that, I'm not even pretty.
While I wouldn't go so far as to say that Billy Wilder was aiming to call out toxic masculinity all the way back in 1959, he does display an understanding of the negativity that stems from it as it applies to women, their bodies, and the way that men conduct themselves.
They don't care, just so long as you're wearing a skirt. It's like waving a red flag in front of a bull.
Really? Well, I'm sick of being the flag. I want to be a bull again.
The narrative isn't heavy-handed about condemning sexism, but the acknowledgement that sexism exists, and to have the male protagonists learn how unpleasant it is to be on the receiving end of it, is refreshing for an old Hollywood film, particularly at a time when the Hays Code was still around. What's particularly revelatory about watching Some Like It Hot over 60 years after it was first released is that by having a laissez-faire attitude towards the more strictly regulated subject matter relative to the time periods it was set and filmed, the film has been able to hold up phenomenally well under the harsh scrutiny of contemporary social norms. As I stated earlier, the subject matter of anything related to homosexuality was one of the few things still being strictly enforced when it came to the Hays Code. Jerry gets pressured by Joe to go on a date with Osgood, so that Joe will be able to mooch off of Osgood's resources to try to woo Sugar. As usual, Jerry goes along with Joe's scheming, even though he doesn't want to. Jerry is begrudgingly tolerating Osgood, but once the champagne starts flowing and the music is playing, Daphne starts to really feel her oats and get swept up by the fantasy. Once Joe comes back from his romantic night with Sugar, he finds Jerry engaged and cheery as can be about it.
I'm engaged. Congratulations. Who's the lucky girl?
I am.
Jerry's plan is to marry Osgood and have a quick divorce so he can take half of his fortune. But despite Joe pointing out that the plan is likely to fail because Jerry isn't actually a woman, the film never outright condemns the broader concept of two men being together.
You can't marry Osgood. You think he's too old for me? Jerry, you can't be serious.
That laissez-faire attitude becomes even more apparent at the end of the film when Jerry tries to get Osgood to break up with him. He begins listing off reasons for Osgood to end it, including being a smoker, being unable to give birth to children, with none of the given reasons being enough to dissuade Osgood. Finally, he snaps, removes his wig, and admits that he is a man. To which Osgood responds with what is undoubtedly the most famous line of the film.
I'm a man.
Well, nobody's perfect.
The Hays Code strictly forbade depictions of homosexuality during its reign of terror, and oftentimes the only LGBT+ characters you could find were queer-coded villains, which would leave an imprint in the psyche of filmmaking culture long after the end of the code.
Don't you bulge?
Huh? Bulge me? I have the most refined seamstress. Comes in just once a month. My dear, she is so inexpensive.
Come on,
And she told... Oh,
Daphne.
all right.
A laissez-faire stance on homosexuality wouldn't be considered revolutionary today, but in the social climate of 1959, Billy Wilder's art was supporting the idea of cross-dressing without any of the negative old-time connotations, and a more pansexual approach to attraction. White Chicks was released to largely negative reviews by mainstream critics. It's not particularly surprising that they would fail to understand that the film is more than body humor and jokes about white chicks. One definition of satire is the use of humor, irony, exaggeration, or ridicule to expose and criticize people's stupidity or vices, particularly in the context of contemporary politics and other topical issues. Satire has been a pillar of the most famous Wayans family works, but the sheer volume of topics being addressed in White Chicks, often through satire, is staggering.
Duh, it's totally obvious your lips went from Cameron Diaz to Jay-Z.
At a superficial glance, a mainstream critic could interpret the film's repeated references to plastic surgery and appearance as a mockery of the rich it girls that were a cultural phenomenon of the early 2000s. However, I would argue that the film demonstrates an understanding of how much pressure many women are made to feel to look their best, both in general and in order to be appealing to men.
Well, I'm getting my hair done, and I was thinking that we could go to the movies.
You got taller, too.
We got our knees done.
You can do that?
Oh, I got the Bermuda Triangle. The landing strip.
I got the buckwheat.
I paid thousands of dollars on this outfit, and do you think he even noticed?
In particular, the dressing room scene between Kevin and Lisa leaves a strong impression about how psychologically and emotionally tumultuous it can be to deal with these pressures. Lisa is, by all accounts, a thin, conventionally attractive white woman, and yet she has a total meltdown over how she looks in the outfits she is trying on.
I can't even wear a short skirt and a top without looking like a fat pig!
Kevin and Marcus have to spend a considerable amount of time around women while undercover, and this becomes a crucial component of their character development over the course of the film. It's not unlike Sandra Bullock's character journey in Miss Congeniality, where she eventually unlearns her internalized misogyny. Realistically, if I were to try to explain White Chicks to someone who hadn't already seen it, I would say it's a combination of Some Like It Hot, Miss Congeniality, and of course, In Living Color. Between Kevin and Marcus, Marcus definitely has the better arc when it comes to becoming more emotionally sensitive and understanding of women. Kevin's arc bears a resemblance to Tony Curtis's character, Joe, in that the character development is razor thin. Completely lie about who you are to try to get the girl, and when you get exposed, you still get the girl? Marcus, however, does undergo an evolution over the course of the film. Marcus starts off being dismissive of his wife's feelings, and then he is thrust into the storm of experiencing predatory, unwanted behavior from men, from unwanted physical contact, a refusal to back off despite being repeatedly rejected, and an attempt to spike a drink to get what they want. Marcus is put through the ringer. Marcus and Kevin both witness firsthand how much emotional turmoil Karen is put through because of Heath. Heath is Heather Vandergeld's boyfriend, but he likes to call on Karen and string her along as a side piece.
I really think that you need to cut Heath a little bit of slack, okay? Because his aunt just died 3 years ago and he really needs new headshots and he's just going through a really rough time right now, okay?
Through their advice to her, she learns to stand up for herself and end things with him. This becomes an integral part of Marcus learning to better appreciate his wife and be more empathetic to her. Admittedly, the film does focus more on the idea of women dressing up and styling themselves for men than it does women dressing up for themselves. But relative to its early 2000s release date and how many jokes in other Wayans films have aged like milk, it's not a bad watch.
It's mother time! Okay, your mother's so dumb, she went to Dr. Dre for a pap smear. Oh! Something's wrong, Dr. Dre! My coochie's doing a beatbox!
As is customary for a Wayans Brothers production, there is a fair bit of commentary inspired by their life experiences as Black Americans. There are several instances of humor stemming from the collision of their Black cultural references with the extremely rich white people they encounter on this undercover mission. There's the artful trash-talking they deploy against the Vandergeld sisters, and their total domination in a dance-off. But the film doesn't maintain a constant separation between these groups. No matter how many cultural differences they might have, there is at least one thing guaranteed to bring people together: Vanessa Carlton.
You are.
Oh my god, it's our jam!
This is our jam.
Vanessa Carlton's 1,000 Miles is worthy of being deemed a classic on its own merits, but it's now difficult to separate its place in the cultural zeitgeist from White Chicks. Despite Marcus and Kevin being shown as not knowing the words to 1,000 Miles, the song's cross-cultural appeal is cemented when Marcus tries to scare off his date, Latrell Spencer, by playing the song on the radio, only for Latrell to reveal his deep admiration for the song.
How did you know? I love this song!
Vanessa Carlton said in an interview, "I wouldn't have allowed the song to be used if I was going to be reduced to just being the white girl playing the white girl song, because that's not what this is, and that's not who I am." And of course, the Wayanses know that on some level. The whole reason why they used the song is because they like the song. And the whole point of the joke with Terry is that it's a song that literally everybody loves. Despite that song having such a classical piano part, it's somehow totally genre-crossing. Music has a salient presence in White Chicks, and the first appearance of 1,000 Miles segues into another point of commentary regarding race. Another song starts playing in the car right after 1,000 Miles, the title of which I cannot say, prompting Kevin and Marcus to enthusiastically sing along because they can say it. The rest of the women in the car are scandalized.
So what?
The N-word?
Until Brittany and Tiffany give them permission to sing along. The Wayans brothers seem to be speaking through their art on the experiences of navigating the duplicitous attitude people outside of their ethnicity have. Their moral outrage over a slur is entirely performative, as it takes very little prompting to get them to join in and callously say it. White Chicks also speaks on not only white privilege in a broader sense, but specifically as it applies to white women. Long before the internet coined the term Karen, the Wayans brothers were providing commentary on that propensity for white women to weaponize their ability to complain and throw fits to get their way.
I'm gonna have BF.
Wait, hey, what's a BF?
I'm gonna have a BF! Oh my god, she's gonna have a bitch fit! Oh!
I am gonna call the owner of the company.
Come on, just take it easy. Look, we can work this out.
No! I'm gonna write a letter.
No, no, no! Better yet, I'm gonna write a letter! You are in big trouble. Dear Mr. Royal Hampton, I am a white woman in
Ladies,
America.
One more point worth mentioning is the repeated emphasis of Latrell only being into white women.
But it is snowing up in here. Tony, hand me my boots because I'm about to go skiing. Let's go. A white girl with a black girl's ass. I'm taking that home to mama.
Uh-oh.
I'll have the chicken. White meat only.
Oh my god, is that Britney Spears?
Where?
Right over there.
Even the ending of his relationship with Marcus as Tiffany ends up taking a turn because of this characterization. At first, it seems as if it will end in a similar manner as Some Like It Hot.
I'm a man. Well, nobody's perfect.
I ain't what you think I am. Baby, we all got secrets. It's okay.
But Latrell cannot accept the truth that Marcus isn't white.
But you are not.
Yeah, I'm not a woman.
White? Oh, the deception!
Though Some Like It Hot has been regarded as a classic for decades, too many people have dragged their feet to accept that White Chicks has just as much to offer in the way of entertainment, humor, and social commentary. Some Like It Hot offers commentary about sexism and sexual orientation, but White Chicks has even more to say about race relations, privilege stemming from race or wealth, sexism, and unrealistic beauty standards. White Chicks also has a more heartwarming approach to how the men come to appreciate women in a platonic sense, thus dispelling the outdated idea that men and women can't be friends without it becoming romantic.
We'll hang out. Yeah, we're gonna all get together and we're gonna go
Admittedly, both films are a product of their times, but it doesn't mean they've lost their charm. However, to ensure that I present a broader perspective of these types of films of men dressing up as women, I want to refer to a video by gender-fluid YouTuber Council of Geeks, whose pronouns are she and they.
And generally speaking, when men in mainstream entertainment were depicted as dressing as females, there were two consistencies in pretty much every depiction. It was played for comedy, and they weren't doing it by choice. Something was forcing their hand. There were circumstances that gave them limited choices that they decided to do this.
These films on their own might not directly condemn trans or gender nonconforming identities, but in a media landscape where there often aren't enough stories created by or starring trans or gender nonconforming creatives, they can inadvertently play into harmful patterns and ideas that stigmatize these identities. Perhaps someday artists from these communities will collaborate to make an updated version of these two comedies, and then we will be able to have a trilogy of wacky best friends getting into hijinks comedies that will both entertain and present the evolution of cultural attitudes and social consciousness related to various marginalized identities.
Good night, honey.
Hi, I'm LadyJenevia, and I've been working on this video essay for months on and off since I've had other things going on, but it's finally finished. If you've made it all the way to the end, thank you. This topic was not requested by anyone, but it was something that interested me, so I made it. If you're new to my channel, feel free to browse some of my other video essays, and even if you're not new, make sure you go and watch my latest video that I've uploaded, which is an interview with actor Raul Castillo, best known for his role as Mikey Guzman in Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead. It was really fun to chat with him, and I really want more people to watch that interview, so go watch it. Subscribe for more videos of my opinions or deep dives into works of fiction that interest me. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!